Park, that glorious slice of Lancaster County, okay? They've got room to spare, believe me. We still have some of our stuff stored there. It's like a post-apocalyptic, just corridor after corridor of empty space. But free space was free space. We had a little museum at the Borough Corporate Park. You can imagine how much foot traffic we got there. But now, LGH gave us the ground floor of 410 North Lime Street, which is right across the street from the funky little gas station that's tucked into the cemetery. But we're at the corner of Lemon and Lime. You can remember that. So please come around and pay us a visit. We are new. This has only been since 2022. And when it comes to the board, look at me. I'm one of the youngest members of the board. If you have an interest in this stuff, talk to us. We're interested in volunteers, researchers, etc. So let's get to the cool stuff we have. I don't know, I imagine we have some steampunk fans here, but I love the artifacts that have a steampunk aesthetic. The items that mix kind of recognizable technology with Victorian-style brass and woodwork. And this particular portable X-ray was developed by American physicist and engineer William Coolidge. It's one of these items, I think. I mean, you might use your own artistic judgment to agree or disagree. But as I describe the history of X-ray, I hope to provide enough background to give you an appreciation for how cool and revolutionary this particular item was. Any Hemingway fans? Okay, when Mike Campbell is asked, how did you go broke? Do you remember his answer? Slowly and then all at once. The discovery of X-ray kind of went the same way. So the discovery of X-ray was a sudden big event that happened as a consequence of lots of cumulative things. So a reasonable place to start would be about 1801 with Johann Ritter's experimentation with prisms. Ritter noticed that when he used prisms and cast the spectrum across paper that was soaked in silver, paper that was soaked in silver chloride, those of you who are into photography might know that silver chloride will get dark when exposed to light. But Ritter noticed that even in what we know now as the ultraviolet range of the spectrum, the paper was darkening. He couldn't see those rays, but he knew there was something there beyond the visible spectrum that was affecting this paper. The field of photography was also advanced in the middle of the 1800s by people who, like Ritter, explored substances that changed when exposed to light. In 1871, Richard Maddox invented dry plate photography, which, unlike wet plate photography, allowed the photographers to create a plate and store it for a long time, and then make an exposure and then stash it without having to develop things on the spot. That story is that's gonna come into play in a little bit. And finally, others were identifying and experimenting with fluorescent substances. These things that could absorb one kind of light and reflect another. And think about those ultraviolet lights. If you have something that fluoresces and then you hit it with your invisible ultraviolet light and you see it fluorescing, you now have a way to detect the presence of invisible light. See where this is going? Okay. How many of you remember AP Physics and the Crookes tubes? So Sir William Crookes was interested in studying how electricity moved through gases or a vacuum, and he created these glass tubes with embedded metal electrodes that could be connected to current sources. And when this was done, a ray appeared between the electrodes. The color of the ray, interestingly, depended on the gas that was in the tube. The exact nature of the rays was unknown, but careful observation showed that the rays were charged and that they traveled in straight lines, as Crookes would famously demonstrate by showing that a metal Maltese cross embedded inside one of these tubes would cast a shadow on the other end of the tubes. Why was Crookes a fan of using these Maltese crosses? How's your Latin? What's the Latin word for cross? See what he did there? Huh? Huh? Okay. It says physicists don't have senses of humor. Finally, the rays could make targets like the surface of glass fluoresce. And of course, you know, this is the foundation of the cathode ray tube, the CRT, the television and monitors that we dealt with for oh so many years. So on November 8th, 1895, we're coming up on the 130th anniversary, German physicist Wilhelm Röntgen was experimenting with Crookes tubes and fluorescent targets. Now this is a simplified explanation of what he was doing, but he was working with a special kind of Crookes tube that had a tiny window at one end, and that's my attempt to put the little window at the end. A tiny window at one end. Cathode rays don't penetrate glass, but they could pass through thin sheets of metal, and this fascinated Röntgen. So he studied this by sealing these windows or holes with different of metal to see which metals would allow the cathode rays to pass through. So how did he measure whether or not the cathode rays were getting through? Well, he would put some kind of fluorescent target opposite the cathode ray tube. So he wanted to see even the most subtle effects on these targets. So he made the room as dark as possible by covering the bright tube with cardboard. See, I've got a little cardboard hood there. And this created unusually dark conditions, conditions that other people who were messing with the cathode ray tubes were not experiencing. So because things were so dark under Röntgen's condition, it allowed him to notice that when he powered up the Crookes tube, another target far removed from his experimental setup was also glowing. Okay, remember, cathode rays traveled in straight lines, and they don't get very far in the air. So Röntgen correctly concluded that another type of ray was being broadly emitted from the cathode ray tube. It could obviously penetrate the cardboard, and as Röntgen was eager to discover, almost anything else he put between the tube and a fluorescent target. On December 22nd, 1895, so just a few days, well, I guess, a month and a half later, Röntgen got a photographic plate and invited his wife Bertha to the lab. Okay? Imagine her excitement. And the result is widely regarded as the first clinical X-ray image. I suspect that most of us learned the word X-ray from like an alphabet picture book with apples and balls and cats and things like that. Try to erase all knowledge you have of X-ray images. The only time you are going to encounter a skeleton or a skeletal hand like that is going to be if you were unfortunate enough to come across someone's skeletal remains. Röntgen couldn't have been happier to develop this plate, and he proudly showed it to his wife, who replied, "I have seen my death." So what was happening? Remember, we still don't know quite what's going on here. So the world's going to have to wait several years to understand exactly what X-rays were. In 1897, J.J. Thomson concluded that cathode rays were electrons. In 1913, Niels Bohr finally explains how electrons surround atoms in discrete energy levels and absorb or emit electromagnetic energy as they change levels. We now know that electrons in the cathode ray pass the nuclei of other atoms, and they are slowed and redirected when this happens. So when the electrons decelerate, they emit photons. Some of these photons might be in the form of visible light, some of them might be in the form of ultraviolet light, and then some of them might have, if you follow me here, I'm going shorter and shorter wavelengths, and some of them are X-rays. X-rays can be thought of just like photons of light. Röntgen published his findings on December 28, 1895, and made no attempt to patent his procedure. Anyone with a Crookes tube and photographic plates was able to generate X-rays and make what we now call radiographs. Think of that. Anybody and everybody could do it. On February 3rd, 1896, so 6 weeks after Bertha's X-ray, Dr. Gilman Frost and his physicist brother at Dartmouth took the first diagnostic X-ray in the US. Young Eddie McCarthy, okay, that's one of the most New England stories ever. Young Eddie McCarthy fractured his wrist. Can anybody guess? It's February, so he's doing what? Close. He's ice skating. He's ice skating on the Connecticut River and fractures his wrist. And there, if I'm holding my hand this way, he's fractured his extreme ulna right there. Pretty good image for a bunch of guys who are going, hey, let's try this. Okay, Tim, where's Tim? Okay, whose line is that? Yeah, oh, I'm so disappointed. Yes, it's from a song. I'm going to tell everybody. It's Sting. Never saw no miracle of science. It's from If I Ever Lose My Place, Lose My Faith in You. If I ever lose my place, you see what I'm thinking about as I'm making a presentation. Right, yes. Okay, I've lost my faith in you. Yes, so it's Sting. So the people who studied X-rays in experimental settings know that these things can burn, but they know nothing about DNA, much less about how X-rays could affect DNA. Damaging DNA can, of course, damage the cell's ability to repair itself and regulate replication. Unregulated replication is, of course, cancer. Okay, so cool device. It's going to take us a little bit of time to realize how dangerous these things are. So, and remember, Crookes tubes are unregulated, so you get stuff like this coming along with your traveling circus. Circus train comes into town and they say, hey, want an X-ray? Step right up. I'm sure there's a perfectly qualified radiology certified carny working that X-ray machine. Okay? You can find images like this all over the place and just see how ubiquitous and unregulated X-rays were. Okay? So Crookes tubes are like light bulbs. And when you think of light bulbs, you think of Edison. So Thomas Edison loved this. It seemed like the perfect technology for him to develop new ideas. So you can guess why he at first was really enthusiastic about X-rays. And he exhibited the fluoroscope in 1896. He has got this gadget, this fluorescent screen that you can hold up, and if you place an individual between, there it is, there's the Crookes tube, and we know what it's throwing off, and those rays are passing through this woman, and they are illuminating this fluorescent screen. Although the practice has been improved, many of you might have had a fluoroscopy. I hope you can see the problem for the early practitioners. Yeah, I mean, your objective is to just stand in the way of these X-rays. Edison, and this was a cool idea if you don't understand how dangerous X-rays were. Edison also developed this scanning version of a fluoroscope. So there's a fluorescent screen there. This guy is looking at the bones of his hand by staring straight at the Crookes tube. And this was a wonderful device, and this is happening in the early 1900s. This really was, if you forget about the radiation, this really was an excellent way to quickly scan a body for bullets. Okay, you put the Crookes tube behind the patient, and you hold up that screen, and then you just like kind of scan through the patient's body. And this could have, would have, should have been revolutionary. But Clarence Daly was Edison's, one of his primary assistants. And Daly was a glass blower, really good glass blower, not much background in physics or science. So there's the man himself. In less than 4 years, he starts getting really sick. And Edison starts dropping these hints and going, I think it's these X-ray things. Maybe you should lay off. And he's going, no, these are cool. And by 1902, he needs skin grafts in his left hand because as he's testing these tubes, and this was actually kind of common, and this was common even with dental assistants up until the 40s and 50s, they would test their X-ray the way we test bath water. And they would just put their hand in the way and go, oh, yeah, it seems like it's working. Because, of course, you can't see the X-rays. So let's fire up the machine, click it once or twice. Yeah, it's there. All right, go. So he loses the skin on his hand. Skin grafts don't work. He gets his arm amputated, and you can probably imagine where this is going. And by 1904, he succumbs to cancer and is likely to be the first person to at least knowingly die from X-ray exposure. Edison wanted no part of X-ray after that. He said, I'm out, don't need it. By the time of Daly's death in 1904, the dangers of X-rays were apparent, and a new group of scientists aimed to understand them well enough to allow their benefits to outweigh the costs. The General Electric Company in Schenectady, New York, developed most of Edison's lighting inventions, and in 1905, William Coolidge perfected the light bulb with the development of ductile tungsten. We have him to thank for the ubiquity of the light bulb. We have Edison to thank for the invention, Coolidge is the one that made it possible to throw light bulbs in trucks and send them to Lowe's. Light bulb filament material needs to have a high melting point, but it also needs to be ductile. You need to be able to hammer it out into long, thin threads to make wire coils. These properties are generally mutually exclusive for metals, but Coolidge found a way to do it. Taking these skills from perfecting the light bulb to X-ray tubes, Coolidge understood that a tungsten filament was also the key to controlling X-ray dosages. The cathodes of a Cook's tube were crude masses of metal that just shed electrons chaotically. So Coolidge created a coiled tungsten cathode that could create precisely sized clouds of electrons. He then added an electrostatic lens, which is really just a magnet that directs the electrons, that concentrated the cathode ray onto the anode target. And then an angled anode. Think of how simple this was. You just angle the anode and you can control, at least a little bit, the direction of the X-ray. So between controlling the cloud size of the electrons, he could also control the acceleration by controlling the voltage across the Crookes tube. That's not particularly new. But he's also concentrating the beam with this, basically an electromagnetic lens, and then he's directing the rays. Okay? Coolidge has come a long way. So Coolidge also designed a portable boom that would allow clinicians to position the tube over a bedridden patient. And this is exactly the model that we have in the museum. Come see it. This also brought the patient close to these high voltage electrical wires. And people did not understand, if you think they didn't understand radiation, they also didn't understand electricity. And here's a study that I happily found just like a couple days ago, but X-ray related deaths due to electrical discharges. People who were shocked to death while using an X-ray machine. And you can see that even though we had the radiation thing pretty much figured out by 1920, people were still electrocuting themselves with these contraptions. Don't worry, you can't plug ours in. So X-rays today. The Coolidge tube is still the basis of modern X-rays. Of course, I hope you haven't been well educated in different kinds of X-rays, but you might know that there are also proton and electron type therapies. But the good old X-ray still operates pretty much the way Coolidge set it up. And as you can see, between understanding the dangers of radiation and the dangers of electricity, it took about 50 years to fully understand what was going on. And if you look back at this figure here, when do things suddenly start getting better? About 1940, 1950. I don't think it's any accident that the awareness of atomic energy and the atomic bomb probably also refocused the clinical field about the safety of electricity. And radiology today follows the ALARA principle, as low as reasonably achievable. Use a small targeted dose. And of course, X-rays are governed by not only OSHA, but the FDA and the CDC. If you want to hang around, I'll talk to you more about this is the hand of an unfortunate dental technologist. And I don't have time for my awesome coding story, but if you got your degree in computer science after the mid-1980s, you probably heard about the Therac 25 and a series of horrible medical accidents that are blamed on the programmers. I blame it on the people who thought they could take software from an older machine and just dump it in a new machine and make it go. So that's all I've got. Thanks a lot. Please visit. These are all of our board members. And that QR code takes you to a site where you can throw a couple bucks our way. We are obviously a nonprofit. We have exactly one employee. Everybody else is volunteer. So thanks a lot. Again, I'm happy to hang out for questions.
Anybody have some questions now? We have a couple minutes if anybody wants any now.
I have a lobotomy kit. I forgot to show you that. Yes? No, I don't. Well, honestly, I don't know. Possibly. Good question. Yep. I I have not. She asked about the Shroud of Turin. I don't know the backstory or what the hypotheses are there. Sorry. Yep.
I'm not familiar with the Therac 25 incident. What happened?
What happened? If we go all the way back to the Therac 25 was a radiotherapy device, radiation for cancer, and it's still operated by basically the old Crookes tube model. Remember that a Crookes tube is doing two things. It's throwing electrons and then also using electrons to generate X-rays. So wouldn't it be great if we had a device that could, and treating cancer was sometimes done with electrons. If you treat cancer with electrons, it's usually just superficial tumors because electrons don't penetrate tissue as well as X-rays do. So we have one machine that's doing both kinds of therapy with the same gun, okay? If you want to generate X-rays, you have to have a high power stream of electrons, a really super clinical power stream of electrons to generate useful X-rays. You can probably see where this is going. And so you had two settings. You had low power electron setting for electron therapy, or you had high power electron setting so electrons could create X-rays and you could treat the patient with X-rays. Long story short, there was a glitch that led people to be treated with the electrons while the machine was thinking they were being treated with X-rays. So people were getting blasted with electrons, virtually burning holes through their bodies. Now a radiation burn is just like, oh, it looks like you got a little sunburn, and the clinic would just kind of send them home. Meanwhile, a whole basically core of tissue has now been irradiated, and the tissue, not just the surface tissue, but even the internal tissue starts to get necrotic and dying. And you know, if you hit a blood vessel or something like that, and many patients died slow, painful deaths because there was also a whole horrible story about how the injuries weren't being reported. And anytime you read about this, it's like, this is what goes wrong when people don't pay attention to their coding. Bullshit. This was not a coding problem. There were so many layers of negligence in the Therac 25 case. I can give you, you can find me at Millersville. I'm the only guy in the psychology department holding a brain. Email me, I'll send you some great summary articles on that. Yeah.
Runkin, is that a unit of
Radiation.
Yeah, the unit of radiation, yep. And I forget what they call radiographs. Everywhere else but the United States, they call radiographs like Röntgen images or something like that. He gets a lot more credit, yeah.
The Geiger.
Comment that your former code in Burl Industries Industrial Park was somewhat appropriate since that was in the past.
RCA, yep.
Creator,
Excellent point.
manufacturer of cathode ray tubes.
Yep.
Just to touch on the Therac 25, it sounds super familiar. Cautionary Tales, the podcast, has an episode or two on that. If anybody wants to hear a long story, did a good
Neat.
summary.
Just horrible stories of patients. Like when patients go for radiation therapy, they usually go for like 5, 6, 7 sessions. So you have patients who know what the experience is like, and then one time they hear the machine go clunk, and then and they scream. And one gentleman just like got out of the bed and started banging on the, it's like real horror movie kind of stuff.
Actually, I think that guy passed away like less than 6 months later.
Mm-hmm.
The radiation issue.
Yeah. Yep.
Last one, yeah, let's go for it.
I wanted to share a fun fact. X-ray films are still called in Turkey Röntgen films.
Good. Yes.
Fun.
Right. It's just Röntgen has kind of been written out in the U.S. So that's good. I think he deserves more credit. Yep.
Well, thank you again so much. We look forward
Thanks.
to you next year,
Okay.
where